Do people in the spring palettes typically look like in terms of their coloring characteristics? In this video, I'm going to be walking through memory lane and showing you people who were actually color analyzed in the True Spring palettes, Warm Spring palette, Bright Spring palette, and Light Spring palette. Now, everybody in this video has given me permission to share these pictures. If you don't see a particular coloring in this video, it just means I likely don't have permission from a client to share their pictures and information. I find the spring palettes are the most overlooked palettes in terms of self-color analysis and most often confused palettes. I'm going to start with True Spring. Now, I find natural hair colors expected in True Spring to be most confused because many people think you have to have a light hair color to be a True Spring, which is not correct in the system I use. Somebody who is a True Spring could have naturally dark hair right through to very light hair. In my experience, your hair does not have to have obvious warmth to it around the age of 20 to be given a True Spring palette. Also, eye colors, I just want to recap, any generic eye color could be given a True Spring result. This person is a True Spring. 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 This person is a True Spring, but was suggested to focus on the darker colors in the True Spring color palette family on her. This person was also given a True Spring result. Now let's move on to Warm Spring. The Warm Spring palette is the palette that rests between spring and autumn. It's darker and softer than True Spring, and it's brighter and lighter than True Autumn. Somebody who has coloring aligned to this palette, you would look at them and go, I can't easily tell if they're an autumn or a spring in terms of their skin characteristics and what have you. Somebody who's a warm spring in the system I use as well, around the age of 20, their hair would not be a light blonde color typically. It typically would be in the medium brown range, perhaps a lighter brown range with some, blonde aspects to it, but it wouldn't be like a light and bright blonde because you wouldn't look at the person and go, I can't easily tell if they're an autumn. We'll also say somebody who is a warm spring, they also would not perhaps have obvious warmth to their hair. They don't have to. Here's an example of my friend Beth, who I've shared with you before. This is her colored hair, but around the age of 20, her hair was, I would say, in the medium-ish brown range and not very obviously warm. Here's another warm spring, and this is her natural hair color. Here's another warm spring. Here's another warm spring. I actually realized when creating this video, I don't have permission from a Light Spring yet to share the pictures and information with you, but this person is a true light. So she is the palette exactly midway between spring and summer. So she's very close to a light spring. And this is her natural hair color. So somebody who is a light spring would show summer and spring qualities to their coloring. And their hair would typically be extremely light blonde around the age of 20. Now the final spring palette to cover, which is the Bright Spring palette. Bright Spring is the palette that rests between spring and winter. You would look at a Bright Spring and go, I can't easily tell if you're a winter or a spring. So somebody's coloring would look of both palettes. Any eye colors can be seen in this palette, but somebody who's a bright spring, because you would look at them and go, I can't tell if you're a winter. Somebody who's a bright spring in the system I use would have darker hair color. Somebody who's a bright spring in the system I use, naturally hair color around age 20 would not be red. It wouldn't be blonde. It wouldn't be a medium brown. It would typically be a darker hair color in the chestnut brown range or even very close to black. This person's a bright spring. This person's a bright spring. And this person's a bright spring. Hopefully this video has helped you to orient your mind on what some springs may look like who've actually been color analyzed. I'm not a fan, like I've said in the previous videos, of celebrity pictures out there because in many cases they haven't been color analyzed with no makeup on, colored hair covered, etc. And I love to show you real life examples of people who've actually been color analyzed so that when you perhaps get a result from me, you could look at those examples and perhaps see yourself or some qualities of your coloring in these examples. Yay, the spring palettes!